Two rooms, same moment, same decision. In one room, US forces move into Venezuela, fast, quiet, without Congress being told. In the other room, executives from America's biggest oil companies walk into the White House. Chevron, ExxonMobil, ConocoPhillips, Continental Resources. That timing is not a coincidence. It is the story. I'm Fareed Zakaria, and this moment forces us to ask a question that is deeply uncomfortable. Is US foreign policy still driven by national interest? Or has it become a pathway to private profit? House Democrats are now investigating whether Trump administration officials or major oil companies stand to benefit from this military action. Who profits? Who controls the money? And who decided that the United States might run Venezuela's oil for years? If you want to understand how power really works today, stay with me, because Venezuela is not the headline, it is the warning, and to see why, we need to define the problem clearly. Let's slow this down and define the issue clearly. This is not just about Venezuela, and it is not just about oil. It is about how decisions are made, who is informed and who is not. The US military moved into Venezuela without notifying lawmakers. That alone raised alarms on Capitol Hill, including among Republicans. At the same time, oil executives were meeting at the White House discussing Venezuela's oil future, its infrastructure, its markets, and its control. President Trump has openly said the United States could run Venezuela and extract its oil for years. But lawmakers are asking basic questions. Who pays for rebuilding? Who controls the funding? And which companies benefit? So far, there are few clear answers. That uncertainty is why House Democrats launched this probe. They are not accusing, they are demanding transparency. Because when foreign policy, military force, and private business intersect, the risk is not ideology. The risk is conflict of interest. And to understand how we got here, we have to look backward before we can look forward. To understand this moment, we need context. Venezuela was once one of the world's richest oil states. Its wealth came almost entirely from oil, and that dependence shaped everything. When oil prices were high, the system worked. When prices collapsed, the system broke. Years of mismanagement followed. Infrastructure decayed, production fell, debt exploded, oil fields aged, refineries rusted, skilled workers left. What remained was not just an economic crisis, it was a power vacuum. For the United States, Venezuela became more than a failing state. It became a strategic asset, oil that was close, heavy, difficult to extract, but enormous. As global energy politics hardened, Venezuela shifted from liability to opportunity. And history tells us something important here. When a country's economy collapses around a single resource, outside powers rarely look away. They move closer. That is the backdrop. A broken system, a valuable prize, and a moment of unilateral action. Now, let's look at the first shock that made this crisis impossible to ignore. The first shock came quietly, but its implications were explosive. The US military action in Venezuela happened fast. Without advance notice to Congress, without a public roadmap, without clear limits, that alone triggered alarm. Then lawmakers learned something else. On the same day, oil executives were meeting at the White House. Suddenly, this was no longer just a security question. It became a governance question. In a classified briefing, members of Congress asked direct questions. Who would rebuild Venezuela's oil infrastructure? Who would fund it? And who would control the money? The answers were unclear or unavailable. That uncertainty mattered because President Trump had already made a bold claim that US companies would invest massive sums and that America could run Venezuela's oil system for years. Some executives quietly doubted this was realistic. Lawmakers noticed the gap between rhetoric and reality, between power and oversight. This was the first crack in the story, and once it appeared, others quickly followed. If you're finding this analysis useful, pause for a moment and stay with me, because the real mechanics of this crisis operate beneath the surface, and that's where we're going next. What is happening here is not chaos. It is a system, and once you see the system, the pieces start to lock into place. First, executive power. Military action launched quickly, with minimal disclosure and limited congressional oversight. Second, private capital. Oil companies with existing interests, with assets, with expertise, and with something to gain. Third, access. Direct meetings at the White House. Before lawmakers are briefed, before the public understands the plan. This is how modern influence works. Not through secret deals, but through alignment. Foreign policy creates opportunity. Opportunity attracts capital. Capital seeks access. Access reshapes policy. None of this requires a written agreement or an explicit order. The system runs on incentives. That is why lawmakers are asking specific questions. Who requested what? Who promised what? And who benefits if Venezuela's oil flows again? This is not about accusing motives. It is about mapping power. Because when military force opens the door, the market rarely stays outside. And once that door is open, the consequences move far beyond Washington. That brings us to the second shock. The second shock came from Congress itself, and this time it crossed party lines. The Senate advanced a war powers resolution. Its goal was simple: to limit further U.S. military action in Venezuela. 5 Republicans supported it. That mattered because it signaled something rare: bipartisan unease. Lawmakers were not just questioning the policy, they were questioning the process. Why was Congress not informed? Who authorized the scope of this action? And how long was it meant to last? Behind closed doors, doubts grew louder. Not about oil's value, but about control. Who would manage Venezuela's infrastructure? Who would sell the oil? And who would oversee the revenue? The administration had few clear answers. This was no longer theoretical. It was operational. If military force creates access and private companies move in, then Congress is left reacting after the fact. That is the core tension. Power moving faster than oversight. And while lawmakers debate resolutions, another group is already affected: ordinary people. And that is where this story turns personal. Now, let's talk about you, because systems always land somewhere. And they usually land on ordinary people. If you are watching this, you are already living in a world shaped by decisions like this. When foreign policy is driven without transparency, trust erodes. When military power moves faster than oversight, accountability weakens. And when private interests sit closest to power, the public pays the price. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually you feel it in higher energy costs, in instability abroad, in a growing sense that decisions are made far away by people you did not choose for reasons you were never told. This is why this matters. Not because of Venezuela alone, but because it shows how power now operates. If you believe foreign policy should serve the public, not private gain, this is the moment to pay attention. Stay with me. Share this conversation. Question it, because what happens next does not stop at Venezuela's borders. It spreads, and that brings us to the global consequences. What happens in Venezuela never stays in Venezuela. Oil is global, power is global, and so are the consequences. When the United States acts unilaterally, other nations recalibrate. Allies ask questions. Rivals draw conclusions. If military force can be used to secure resources, that precedent travels fast. Energy markets react first. Uncertainty drives volatility. Prices move on perception, not just supply. Then comes geopolitics. Countries with oil assets take note. So do investors. So do governments that depend on stability. This action sends a signal. That power, not process, sets the rules. And when rules feel flexible, trust weakens. International institutions lose leverage. Diplomacy becomes transactional. Influence becomes personalized. This is how global order frays, not with a single dramatic collapse, but through repeated exceptions. Venezuela becomes another data point, another test case. And once the world adjusts to that reality, the future stops being theoretical. It becomes a set of choices. 3 of them. So let's look ahead. Not emotionally, but structurally, there are 3 paths forward. The first is the best case. Transparency increases. Congress reasserts oversight. Clear limits are placed on military action. Oil investment, if it happens, is regulated, disclosed, and accountable. In this future, power is checked. Institutions recover balance. The system bends but does not break. The second path is the middle ground. Investigations continue, but slowly. Oversight exists, but after the fact. Deals are not illegal, just opaque. Policy and profit coexist. Uneasily, this becomes the new normal. The third path is the dangerous one. Executive power expands further. Military action becomes routine. Private interests align even more closely with foreign policy. Congress reacts, but too late. The public grows cynical, and trust erodes beyond repair. History tells us something uncomfortable. Systems rarely collapse suddenly. They decay quietly. Which path we take depends on one thing: whether accountability keeps pace with power. And that brings us to the final question: what do we do now? This story ends where it began, with a choice, not in Caracas, not in the White House, but with you, because democracy does not disappear in one dramatic moment. It fades when attention fades. What House Democrats are doing now is not about revenge. It is about sunlight. Asking who met whom, who promised what, and who benefits when power moves without consent. That matters, because when foreign policy becomes a business opportunity, citizens become spectators. And history is clear on this point. Unchecked power never corrects itself. It is corrected, or it hardens. If you believe military force should answer to the public, this matters. If you believe markets should not write foreign policy, this matters. And if you believe democracy survives only when people stay engaged, this matters most of all. So don't just watch this story. Follow it, question it, share it, demand clarity, because the next time this happens, it may not be Venezuela. And by then, the precedent will already be set.